Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Pauling from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. I'm on the administration team for the Geothermal Collegiate Competition, which is funded by the Department of Energy's Geothermal Technologies Office. The Geothermal Collegiate Competition engages student teams to develop and analyze forward-thinking concepts for district energy systems using geothermal resources for a community or campus. We are very excited to have transitioned into a full academic year competition so that student teams will have more time to fully explore their proposed ideas and so that we can provide more webinars and more resources for the teams throughout the competition period. Thank you so much to our partner, Nation of Makers, for co-hosting this Wednesday webinar series. Today, we will be talking about stakeholder engagement. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the competition's HeroX page for future reference. If you do not want your image captured in this recording, please ensure that your camera is turned off. We will be holding a moderated question and answer period at the end of the webinar. However, we encourage you to post your questions in the chat throughout, and our team will keep track of them. Feel free to introduce yourself and let us know where you are from in the chat. Today, I am pleased to introduce our speaker, Lori Heater. Lori has over 40 years of experience conducting environmental review, permitting, and public engagement programs for energy, infrastructure, and development projects, with a particular expertise in geothermal project development and permitting. Lori has conducted permitting and environmental training programs for energy developers, government agencies, community colleges, and international entities, including the World Bank. Her international work includes environmental review of geothermal development projects and training in Kenya, Djibouti, Italy, Costa Rica, and St. Lucia. Lori began her career at the U.S. Geological Survey in the Area Geothermal Supervisor's Office while earning her Bachelor of Science in Geology at the California State University at San Jose. She started her consulting firm after 5 years at USGS, and she retired from full-time work as president at Panorama Environmental Incorporated in 2019. So welcome, Lori, and thank you so much for speaking to us today about stakeholder engagement.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm happy to be here and talk about a subject near and dear to my heart. So I'll get started. Oops.
Lori, you're muted.
Okay, I'm trying to get my, I'm screen sharing. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is some of the background information about geothermal development and environmental impacts, outreach principles, methods of public engagement, some tips for success, and then I've got a few references at the end that may be useful for your public engagement programs. So, Hannah, I've got a technical issue. The top of my slides is cut off. Can you see them?
Yes, I can see it just fine.
Okay. So what is public engagement? It's known by many different terms, and they're used often interchangeably: stakeholder engagement, social engagement, public outreach, public participation, community outreach. But the basic concept is to involve the community to understand your project and to work collaboratively with the community to have the community understand the project, the decisions agencies are going to make, as well as what are the issues about the project. It's designed to understand what the community concerns are so that you don't have conflicts at the end of the project. So I realize you've had a couple previous webinars on Geothermal 101 and direct use, but I just wanted to have a couple slides to give my slant on it from the environmental impact and social engagement standpoint, because this is what social engagement is about. What does it mean? So the first picture is a flash steam plant. Electricity can be generated from geothermal development, and those systems are usually large, have a lot of impacts, and take a lot of space. Binary projects have smaller projects, like the flash steam project. There is 140 megawatts with multiple wells in a very large area. A binary project, maybe 20 megawatts, 5 megawatts, and it has less effect, less emissions. And then there are also wellhead generators that haven't been used much in the US, but are used quite a bit in Kenya right now. And they can be on a small well pad that's 200 by 200, 400 by 400. And with direct use geothermal, there are many different types of direct use, and the previous speaker did a great job going over these, but just a reminder of the type of direct use projects that you can have. And keep in mind that all of these have different levels of environmental review, impact, and public concern. Geothermal development has different phases, and there's different phases both in the direct use process as well as energy development. These photos depict energy development, but direct use also has the planning and drilling phase, the construction phase, and the utilization or operation phase. And they all have different impacts or issues that the public can be concerned about. This is a photo of, these are photos of small rigs that may be more used in direct use projects where the wells may not be as deep. And you can see some of them are small enough they could fit in a road median or a parking lot. Larger rigs with deeper wells have much larger well pads. This graphic shows some of the features on a rig and the equipment. You need a reserve pit, you need generators and fuel tanks, and the very large rigs, and room to set up the rigs. They're tall, and you have to lay that large structure down before you can erect it. So it takes, this graphic shows 100 meters, but it could be 50 meters, depending on how many wells are going to go on a well pad. So to summarize, the different facilities have different sizes. I'm using English metrics here and not hectares. In the US, it's more common to use acreage and feet for sizes. So these are some of the surface disturbance amounts for geothermal development. So I wanted to touch on some of the common environmental impacts, because this is what people are often concerned about. Air emissions, how much water will be used? What are the safety issues? What am I going to smell? What am I going to see? And I also want to point out and remind people that there are mitigation measures to reduce effects. When you identify an effect or the public identifies a concern, you can seek to find a mitigation measure to avoid, minimize, rectify, reduce, or compensate for the impacts. So to talk about public engagement methods, these are the different processes that can be used for public engagement. And the first is, why do public engagement? Why are we doing this? It's basically what you want to do public engagement for is to inform the public and to avoid conflicts and schedule delays down the road. There are regulatory requirements. Many regulations require public engagement before a permit's issued. The federal agencies, and many local agencies, especially here in California, you have to let the public know when a discretionary permit is going to be issued. And that could be both for permits and environmental documents, such as under the National Environmental Policy Act. But a key thing is to really understand what your community is concerned about, so you can try and address those issues before the project goes to final design and construction, because the last thing you want to do is have a project that is going forward, has been designed and is under construction, and the public identifies a big concern that you have to change your project for at the last minute. That can be really expensive and really delay a project. So the purpose, again, is to try and resolve conflicts ahead of time and to have a project that the community is happy about. You try and build consensus, but sometimes it's informed consent, because there may be projects where you just can't convince someone with science and education. So some of the regulatory drivers for public engagement include the National Environmental Policy Act, where decision makers have to consider the environmental effects of their actions. And as part of the environmental review, in such as an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement for large controversial projects, there is public noticing. There are public noticing requirements, as well as requirements for public meetings. State environmental regulations and permitting may also require public notification, public meetings, and definitely things like if you're discharging water to a stream, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit is required, and you may need to do some public notification. If a project affects wetlands, the Section 404 of the Clean Water Act also requires public notification. And cultural resources have a lot of regulations, because some projects may be near tribal lands or on tribal lands. I wanted to highlight that there are quite a few environmental regulations related to cultural resources protection and notifications and consultation with tribes. Some of them are relatively new, such as the government regulations in California. The regulations have been expanded to ensure meaningful consultation with tribes. So the ethics is in the title of this presentation. So I want to touch on that. What we mean by that is any communication with the public, it is incredibly important to be accurate, to be honest, to be inclusive, to spread your outreach as far as you think it may be concerned, people may be concerned. It's important to be thorough and to really identify what issues can affect the community and to accurately portray those. This is about reputations and trust, yours as an individual, your institutions, your companies that work on the project, and the community. And you really need to be ethical and honest in communications and be genuine in your outreach. And I forgot respectful as well. Civility is so important. So some of the principles of public outreach, to me, the main principles are education and communication. Establishing relationships with the community. They're not a nameless, faceless. People are a lot less inclined to be opposed to a project if they've had a one-on-one dialogue and they have a relationship with someone. And the comments are, it's a lot easier for people to write harsh comments if they haven't interacted with people personally. Other principles are to monitor, analyze, and publish your data, and to acknowledge and address impacts. Don't try and sweep things under the rug, because it will always come back to bite you. Again, what is public engagement? It's working collaboratively with the community so that they feel part of the project. This is especially important when there is opposition to a project, and it can be the difference between a successful project and an unsuccessful project. So, slide got a little out of order, sorry. But what are the principles? Education. Most people don't understand geothermal development, whether it's the agencies or the public. And as a project proponent and doing public engagement, one of your key roles is to help people to understand what the project is. What are the goals of the project, the benefits, the impacts, the protections, and to communicate with this. Your communication helps you to identify what the public is concerned about. It may be something very simple as to moving a project across the street, or putting up a fence, or having a different color fence. But it's important to continue to have these communications, because new issues may come up and you don't want to be surprised at the end of the permitting process or during construction. You want to try and anticipate what the concerns are and how to address the concerns. As I mentioned, relationships you're building are for the long term, especially if you're in a community and you're going to be there. You want to have good relations with the community, and that's important to build that trust so that the community can rely on what they're being told about what the project is and what it will be. It's important for you as a developer to understand what the impacts of the project are and to identify them early. You don't want to be surprised by them, and you want to acknowledge them to the public. It doesn't help to disguise them or say, maybe we shouldn't talk about this right now. The sooner you get it out there, the better it will be. But that being said, you also want to identify if you can avoid or lessen the project's impacts before disclosing them. You always like to have a solution before you identify a problem and communicate it to the public. I think monitoring is also an important principle for large-scale projects that are going to be around for a long time and may have ongoing effects to the public. Monitoring is important so that you can adjust as needed, sometimes called adaptive management, that if an environmental mitigation measure isn't working, for example, the erosion control isn't working, and there's flow onto someone's property, you need to be able to monitor and make sure you know that the effects are being managed as you had planned, and that you're communicating the results. If you make a promise or a commitment that you're going to provide information, it's really important to make sure that you communicate your results and have follow-up communication. So who is the public? Who are the stakeholders? Who should we be trying to reach out to? Government agencies are an obvious one, because you're going to need a permit, usually from some government agency, federal, state, local, depending on where the project is, how extensive the project is, and what the permitting rules are in any jurisdiction. Government can be federal, state, and local, and you should consider government to be both the agencies and the staff, as well as elected officials. Elected officials are often very interested in geothermal projects. City council members, county supervisors, state legislators. Geothermal is a positive story that people can tell. So it's often helpful to notify the elected officials in an area. It's something that's not often considered, but we found it's a really effective tool if you need help from local officials. Local officials don't like to be blindsided and not know about a project. We're focused on the community here, and who is the community? It's not just the adjacent property owners, it's neighbors. In some jurisdictions, you're obligated to notify people within 500 feet. That may not be enough if there's going to be a lot of traffic on certain roads, or large trucks, or a lot of noise that may extend farther than 500 feet. There may be a homeowners association that you can contact that will help notify a lot of people. There may be community groups. If your project's next to a sports field, there may be, the Little League groups or the soccer associations that you may want to talk to if they're nearby. If you're near a school, that's another important aspect, and it may be a learning opportunity that you can share with all levels of schools. So with identifying stakeholders, as with identifying impacts, you want to start early to identify who these people are. Oftentimes going to local leaders or the local government officials, the council members or supervisors, they may be able to help you to identify some of these local groups or traditional use sites, gathering locations, sports facilities in your project area. If you're working on a project that isn't in your specific area of knowledge, oftentimes, we work on projects very far away from our own communities. So what do people care about? What are they going to ask? It's helpful to understand what people are going to want to know and what you may be asked. One of the outreach documents that I'll reference at the end, it was one of the most surprising conclusions was people had similar questions, whether the project was a geothermal leasing project, a development project, whether it was in a national forest or adjacent to a city, or a coal plant or a gas pipeline. People had many of the same questions. So you need to make sure to anticipate what the questions are and that you have answers to these questions. And if you don't have answers, to get back to the community with the answers. These are some of the typical questions related to environmental issues, air emissions, hydrology, seismicity. These are the issues that I highlighted earlier. Biological resources. The questions that people will ask will be different whether the project's in a city, a district heating, or if it's a small binary plant out in the desert away from the community. But these are questions that you should have answers to. So when do you do this? I mentioned doing it early. Talking with the agencies as you're planning the project. If you have a project defined, it's great to talk with the community while you are defining a project, because sometimes talking with the community or leader will help you to know if you just moved that project 50 feet. Geothermal is not necessarily so site specific that you can't move the well pad across the road, for example. You want to develop a contact list. Some of the things you can do early on are the website or the newsletters. You also may have public engagement when you're doing an environmental review, if you have to do a NEPA document, National Environmental Policy Act. And you also should be doing some outreach and community notification, for example, before construction begins, notifying people that construction is going to begin, having a hotline if there are concerns during construction is helpful, another method of public engagement. So you want to involve and update the public and the agencies. You want to hold public meetings at the beginning of the project and identify the project and the process and measures to reduce effects, you want to consider what's the appropriate communication method for the community. In some areas, it may be a one-on-one in a coffee shop, and in others, it may be meetings in a school gym, or it may be websites and looking at, contacting people by snail mail or email. It's important to understand what's appropriate for a community, and you can do that in a variety of ways. It's important to be inclusive and culturally appropriate, depending on who's in the community. How do they get their information? So notification is a key part of the communication. It's important to develop a stakeholder list with contact information. You can get this from an assessor's parcel list. The county assessors often have the mailing addresses. Mailing addresses can be a good place to start. And you can include in your notification letter a question about how do you want to be contacted? Do you want to be contacted? You can also do that on a postcard. Keeping an ongoing list, it's a living document. So we've often used Google Docs or some method where multiple people and groups can access the database and update it as needed. Newspaper notifications are common, but it's kind of old school. Direct mailing, websites, social media, website, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, whatever people are using in the community, if anything. So you have these different types of stakeholders. We tend to group them, and you often may want to have different methods for communicating with these different people. With agency staff, it's often one-on-one meetings and letting them know with follow-ups, whether in person or email communications. NGOs and the public, again, it depends on how much interest there is in the community, what kind of meetings, how often you'll have meetings. With tribal consultation, if there is a lead federal agency, or in California, a state lead agency, there needs to be some form of government to government consultation. And what that means is the highest ranking government official with the highest ranking tribal official. And then there's also staff to staff communications, but you also have to make sure you've covered the government to government communication. Again, you want to establish relationships with all of these folks that express interest. Oftentimes, the tribes may be short-staffed, or the agencies may be short-staffed. You have to make a really good faith effort. It's not enough to just call or send a message. It's not one and done on any of these. You need to really make a concerted effort and have multiple meetings, especially with tribes. And it's especially important to document all your meetings, your phone conversations with people for your project record. That is incredibly important. I've had projects where we had 14 meetings with the group, and they said, and they never met with us once. And we had a whole documentation and a publication with the amount of outreach we had had. So it's important to do that, and it's important for the project record. So I talked a little bit about the different kinds of meetings, the public community meetings and meeting with agency staff and NGOs. It's really important to structure your meetings to be productive. And the way you do that is to have agendas, have sign-ins for meetings, whether it's an electronic tablet or a paper with people signing in with their name and contact info. If you have a large controversial meeting, you may want to set some ground rules. Civility at all times is important. And you want to keep to a schedule, be respectful of people's times, take notes in multiple ways, and document the comments that people have so that you can refer to them. And as you go through the process, you're making sure that you are addressing public comments. So I mentioned the different meeting types. You may set up a large meeting in a meeting room in a hotel. You could do it in, if you expect a lot of interest, you could do it in a school gym. You can have chairs set up, you can have tables. Oftentimes we just have folding chairs set up in a school venue. It's important to have often important to have a neutral location for the meetings. Another method is to have stations around a room where you don't necessarily have just talking to people. You have a more interactive public engagement program where you may have a station where you have some poster boards about the project. What is the project? You may have another section where you have poster boards. What's the schedule for the project? You may have another section of what are the environmental effects and mitigation measures. So the type of project really depends on the number of people that may come. If you don't have much interest, a small room and giving a presentation may be fine. But if you have a lot of people that you think want to have a lot of interaction, it's good to have these stations so you can actually interact with people. One technique, in addition to the poster boards, is having a comment wall instead of having people write on little cards or on a piece of paper or speak in public. Some people are not comfortable doing that. So having methods where people can make their comments and a comment wall to comment on and identifying it by topic is often helpful. So again, to summarize, productive meetings, you have an agenda, you tell people what you're going to talk about, having sign-in methods, setting the ground rules, and being as respectful and polite as possible and encouraging that for everyone. Keeping to the schedule, taking notes and documenting the meetings, and follow up. If you don't have answers for someone, get their contact information and make sure that you go back and follow up and get them the information. Nobody's going to have every answer at all times. So it's okay to say, I'm not sure, but I can get back to you on that. You want to be as prepared as possible, but it's okay to say, I'm not sure about that, assuming it's not one of the basic aspects of the project. So these slides are a little bit about how to go through a public meeting if you haven't done that before. And you want to introduce who's there representing the project, and what you're going to talk about. It's important to describe the project. Having good maps or photos is really key. So much easier now with electronics, and everybody's got a projector, and it's a lot easier to show projects. Identifying who's proposing the project and having a map. Where is the project? Enough details so that people can say, I really know where that is. And how much surface disturbance, because that's one of the keys to environmental effects and how it's going to affect people is, so how big is the area affected? Identify some of the environmental protection measures that you've already identified so that people know that you're considering the environment and concerns about the community. Describe the schedule. And what is the environmental review and permitting process? Do you have to prepare an environmental document? Will there be an environmental impact statement or environmental assessment or information about the project? Consider federal, tribal, state, and local permitting. And have a means for the public to comment. You may have an introductory presentation and you can say, we'll take public comments. If there are a large number of people, you may want to limit the amount of time people can speak. But if it's a small project and a small number of people can just come up and give their comments, but make sure someone's designated to take notes or record the meeting. Websites are great primary sources of information because you can put information up. For example, if you have to do studies or a biological study or a traffic study, you can post that information and let people know the status of the project. Or during construction, you can let people know what's coming next, what the timing is. A note, you should be in communication with your project sponsor. Different agencies have different rules about how to use social media, and you want to make sure that you're representing the project in line with your project sponsor. And with these sponsors, you need to consider what platforms, what's going to be useful to the community, what information will be disseminated, what should not get posted to social media, oftentimes proprietary information on drilling, for example. How frequently will it be updated? And is it going to be interactive? Will it be a website where people can post their comments, or will those need to come in to a separate email? It's a matter of resources. The public engagement programs can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for large projects to do it right. And so, you have to do what fits your budget, but also meets the needs of the community. So you may not have a fancy website. You may just have some basic information, how to communicate, the email address of where to send information, a map showing the project, a brief description of the project. And, in some areas, it may be just talking to people, emailing or mail. The mailing is good documentation that people have been sent information. I want to say a word about managing the comments. Excuse me. There's a reason for getting all these comments, and it's not just to go through the process, but the idea is you're supposed to be able to use these comments. And so you have to have a place where you can go and look at the comments and revisit them as you go through the process, as the project proceeds. Are we considering what the community said? Because you may have meetings early on and then go on and be busy designing your project or building it, and you sort of forget, oh wait, the community is out there. This is an ongoing process. It doesn't end after you've done the first meeting, or maybe the only meeting you have with some small projects. So it's important to ensure that the concerns are met and to communicate to the public in some form how these issues are being addressed. So follow-up communication and review of comments is key. This may be a little bit beyond the scope of some projects, but there are a lot of moving parts for community engagement sometime, and we found that it's very helpful to prepare a stakeholder engagement plan so that everybody's on the same page. It's defining, the project, making sure everybody's using, something as simple as making sure everybody uses the same name for a project. In my experience, I find every project has at least 3 names. And, sometimes it's geographic related, sometimes it's developer related, sometimes it's project type, but pick a name for a project and stick with it. Pick your acronyms and stick with them. Always define your acronyms. So this is a way of thinking ahead about your project and saving time in the future, so that you've got a common definition, you've got a consistent message to tell the public, identify who on your team is going to do what, and writing these things down, there's no confusion. Everybody knows who's doing what. This could be in something as simple as a PowerPoint, if someone, or an outline form. It doesn't have to be a large volume, but using these headings and including these things can be really helpful and save you a lot of time and money down the road. Have a section on what methods are you going to use? What works best for this project? Are you thinking that you have a meeting at the beginning, and then a meeting right before construction, a meeting during environmental review, what you anticipate? Some of these things may change after you meet with the public. And, if all you get is people saying, looks good to me, just send me a notice, you can scale back your plan. But it's important to have some idea based on the extent of your project, number of people it could affect, the effects of the project, how it will affect the community. So you need to think about these things. What tools are you going to need? Do you need a fact sheet for the project? This is also a good method of making a consistent project that everybody is on the same page and has the same acreage numbers, has the same size of project, has the same numbers for water use and things like that. Because it's surprising how numbers can move a little bit with engineers. And if they do move, that's fine, but you just need a consistent way to track what's moving and what has changed. A frequently asked questions is also a handy tool that if you know the answers, you've got a bunch of questions now in this presentation. And if you have standard answers, those can be posted on the website. That can be very helpful. And have a method for updating your plan and tracking your comments so that you're revisiting what the comments are and how you're addressing them. So this, again, just goes a little bit further into what you could include in a stakeholder engagement plan. Who, what, where, why, when, what is the project, why are you doing it, who's involved, what are the regulatory requirements, because you don't want to miss a regulatory requirement and go, oh my gosh, I didn't do this. I have to start, I have to stop and do this 90-day process. So understanding regulatory requirements ahead of time is really helpful. Identifying your stakeholders, key leaders, and then what methods you're going to use, what kind of notices, what kind of meetings, how are you going to identify the issues, who's going to do it, who's going to prepare the environmental document, who's going to review it, construction operations, how will you communicate with the public during construction and operation, the project schedule and project and permitting timetable and schedule, roles and responsibilities, grievance mechanism. That's how will you deal with complaints? Projects usually have a number to call if there's an issue and too much dust is being emitted. And so you need to identify who that community representative will be. And is monitoring or reporting required, both during the stakeholder engagement as well as during construction. So some keys to success: educate, collaborate, and facilitate the movement with the community to a successful project. You want to communicate early, often, be inclusive, have experts speaking, be confident in what you're presenting. And the goal is to achieve consensus and a successful project. You want to identify the regulations, identify the stakeholders, communicate, let people know what you're doing, understand their concerns, and follow up. And at all times, be accurate, honest, ethical, consistent, and ensure your project will be successful. So plan ahead and remember, this is an ongoing process. You want to plan ahead. It saves so much time and money to think about these things ahead of time. You want to be a good neighbor and establish good relationships from the start. You want to identify issues as early as you can and avoid, if you can, rather than mitigate effects. It's a lot less expensive to avoid sometimes than to mitigate. And successful engagement facilitates a successful project. One last thing I want to let you know is that public engagement is not just for those environmental people off in the corner. This is a project aspect. The engineers need to understand the environmental issues and environmental impact analysis. The project engineers and planners need to understand the community concerns. Don't make this silos. Make sure the public engagement team is engaged while you're doing your project engineering, and that public and community engagement is something that the whole team understands and embraces. So that's all I had. And we have prepared two public outreach guides. The first one was back in 2005, a long time ago, where we looked at six geothermal projects and analyzed the comments on those projects. And that's where we found, surprisingly, the comments were very similar, no matter where the project was or what it was. And then we expanded upon that, funded by the California Energy Commission, on more of a how-to guide to educate the public and conduct public outreach. So I hope that was helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you, Lori. That was an amazing presentation. And stakeholder engagement is so important, and like you focused on during your talk, and can really make or break a geothermal project. We did have a couple of questions come in while you're presenting. The first one comes around projects on tribal lands. So if a tribe is the owner operator of the land, does that absolve the developer from the various NEPA requirements, state environmental requirements, et cetera?
That's a really good question, and it can be a complicated one. It depends on the tribe, it depends on the location, and it depends on what they've done in the past. Tribes often have their own tribal NEPA or follow a NEPA equivalent, but how they do it is up to them. And if it's on tribal land, you would hope that they would want to communicate to their public, but it is at their discretion. And so I would encourage it, even if the project's on public land, that there be some presentations. Often tribes are very savvy about environmental review and do full-blown NEPA. It just depends what the level of expertise is of the tribes, their interest, and their capabilities and their staffing. So it really depends. It's sort of a case-by-case situation.
Wonderful, thanks. And then we have another question from one of our teams who is, working through multiple IRB processes for their project, and is asking some questions about data security. So what are the best practices for ensuring data security from surveys and with your contact lists, et cetera? And then also, Lori, in your experiences, how broad do you recommend people go when they're defining their stakeholders?
Okay, so I just see that now. It is difficult to do all the engagement you need to define a project. So you have to start somewhere. One of the ways to sort of is to explore the community. If you're in the community where the project's going to take place, that's obviously very helpful because you often know what the issues are. But the way to do it is sort of go down those checklists of issues and those questions to say, okay, what are the issues here, and see what you can address. I mean, that's why I wanted to make this presentation sort of as much of a roadmap, and what are people concerned about? What are the questions? And so you just have to do your homework, look at what's in the area, look at, if it's all in the city, for example, your issues aren't going to be as hard because it's maybe more about traffic and are there schools nearby. But if you're on land, undeveloped land, then you're going to want to do an endangered species search. You're going to want to look at, are there any sacred sites in the area? Are there traditional use areas? And, one of the things about tribal consultation is consulting with the tribes as early as possible. So if you can do that, that would be great. But if not, you can talk to, say, if it's on BLM land, you can call the BLM office and Bureau of Land Management and ask them, what information do you have about this area? There was something developed, well, I think, did NREL develop something for identifying environmental effects? I know I worked on a project called PV Mapper, where you could enter in a location and it would come up with where the transmission lines, where are there endangered species, are there wetlands, are there floodplains, things like that. So you can do some research ahead of time, but again, I understand the constraints, how much time, how much money, how many resources do you have. So just make an attempt to look at some of those topics and see what you can find out. As students ensure data security in our surveys, having a password protected website or data sharing, you can password protect things, marking things confidential, proprietary. Probably the drilling information and temperatures are the most secure, proprietary, but yeah, you don't want information to leak out to the public before you're ready. So making sure that you have access protected information for your team until you're ready to go public. There are many different ways to do that. IT people can help. And then how broad do I recommend? It depends on the type of project. If it's direct use, talking to the city council, the neighbors, I think you have to do at least 500 feet. Look at the level of effect. How far will your effect travel? How far, are you going to have really high noise levels next to a hospital, for example? That could be problematic, although at OIT, they were able to drill in a parking lot, Oregon Institute of Technology. They drilled a well right in the parking lot near a hospital, and it worked out okay. So definitely the community around, and it's about the scale of the project. So if it's a direct use, it's not something that Sierra Club's going to necessarily care about, right? So I think keeping the scale, if it's a small direct use project, I think, having an article in a community newspaper is helpful because that can help inform people. So it depends a lot on the scale of the project for how wide you go.
Great, thank you, Lori. And I think, one of the things that you mentioned in your presentation was when you were talking about identifying stakeholder groups. There's a lot of groups out there that people don't necessarily think about, and so even if you're doing a direct use project, if there's, sports fields nearby, who's using those sports fields that's going to be impacted during the construction. And so, it's not necessarily just the people who are paying for the project or the people who are benefiting from it. But, anyone who's impacted throughout the development of the project and then the project's life cycle itself. So
yeah, I think that's a good example, the sports fields, or are you next to a hospital? Are you next to a school? Will trucks be going on small roads? Will they need to repair the roads? And who's affected by those roads?
Yeah, great. Well, we are just about out of time. So if we don't have any other questions, thank you, Lori, for the wonderful presentation today. This recording will be posted on our HeroX site for future reference. And then I believe Lori has also graciously offered to provide us with the slides, and we will provide a PDF of that in the resources tab of the HeroX site. So if teams are looking for specific information, they can scroll through those if they don't want to watch the full 60-minute webinar. So thank you very much, Lori. We appreciate your time today.
Sure, great. Thank you, Katie. Good luck, everyone.
Yep. Have a great day, everyone.